Welcome to our Animal Justice Academy Lunchtime Live. Our topic today is how to save Canada's live horse export ban. I'm Kimberly Carroll. I'm the director of AJ. And welcome to all of you good-hearted people who are here with us live at the beginning of a new year. And welcome to those of you who are watching the replay. We don't underappreciate you spending your valuable time with us. So, folks, after the prorogation of Parliament a couple of weeks ago, there was just a lot of sort of gossip, a lot of posts on social media, a lot of people saying the horse, bill, the horse ban is dead. And we just really wanted to set the record straight that the ban is not over. It is not the case. We wanted to have a session to be able to catch you up with what's going on and how we as animal justice are pivoting. We, have been really trying to make this horse export bill that would ban the export of live horses overseas. We've been working on this for years, and we are not about to give up, but we are pivoting. And so what we want to do is we want to be able to engage our AJ super soldiers to help us in this pivot. And that's why today we have two members of our team joining us, Kaitlyn Mitchell and Pierre Sadik. And let's give some little bit of background on both of these. So Kaitlyn is our Director of Legal Advocacy at Animal Justice, where she works to spread the agricultural, she works to stop the spread of ag laws in Canada, to improve legal protections for animals, and to defend the rights of animal advocates. Prior to joining Animal Justice, Kaitlyn worked for over a decade as a public interest environmental lawyer. Her practice focused on promoting environmental justice and legal recognition of environmental rights. Kaitlyn has appeared before numerous courts across the country, including the Supreme Court of Canada. And Kaitlyn is joining us today from Winnipeg. Hey, Kaitlyn.
Hello. Thanks for having me again.
Yay, always good to have you, my friend. And Pierre Sadik is our Government and Legislative Affairs Counsel for Animal Justice. Pierre, how long has it been since you joined Animal Justice?
No, 13 months.
13 months. So Pierre has over 2 decades of legislative affairs experience with various organizations seeking stronger laws to protect animals and the environment in Canada. Pierre has also conducted similar work in Washington, D.C. for a national public interest advocacy organization. He practiced law in Ontario for over a decade, and Pierre is joining us from Ottawa, where he lives with his family, their dog, and 2 rescue cats. Welcome, Pierre. So, Kaitlyn, you don't mention anything about your animal friends in your bio. What's up with that?
I had to lock them out of the room. You've seen how distracting they are.
Well,
Yeah.
we know how much you love them. When we do our
yeah.
animal justice meetings, we've got animals climbing all over us. It's just the way things go in our meetings. So,
Yeah,
Pierre, I have
it's
to just
encouraging.
say, welcome. This is your first AJA event. I'm super excited that you're here. How does it feel? How does it feel to be initiated into the AJA community?
It's a I'm being allowed into the inner sanctum here. No, what I'm really psyched about is that there are so many people who care about this and join your, I think you even used the word soldiers or super soldiers, join your
Absolutely.
troop, and that's fantastic. This is how we
Mm.
bring about change.
Yeah. And Pierre, can you explain a little bit about this position that you have in animal justice? Because it's a new position and it's an exciting position for us to have.
Yes, government legislative affairs, basically another term for it is lobbyist or government relations. So as much as my family and friends find this odd, I enjoy talking to politicians, and that's what I do
Wow.
uh, almost every day. And try to persuade them why they should protect animals, and follow the will of so many Canadians who've said over and over they want things like crazy horse exports stopped. So I
Yeah.
talk to politicians and senior bureaucrats, decision makers about animal protection issues.
CAJers, Pierre speaks to politicians all the time, and he's not rocking back and forth in the fetal position in the corner of the room. Like, this is, we really try to get our AJers to meet with MPs and other political reps, Pierre, and it's a scary thing for folks. So it's good you're here, and you can give a few pointers a little later on.
I will be at the end, talking about how to do that. Yep.
Kaitlyn, in a nutshell, can you give us a rundown of the practice of live horse export overseas for slaughter, how it all works? Just for somebody who maybe isn't as familiar with this, give us the 101.
All right. So for about 20 years, maybe a little bit less, this industry has been operating in Canada, and about 2,500 horses are exported from Canada each year for slaughter overseas. Nowadays, all of the shipments go to Japan. And the reason that they're exported live is because they are fattened when they get to Japan, and then they're slaughtered in order to be eaten as a raw delicacy. So it's a very niche market. And we've been really concerned about it for some time as Canadians and activists across the country, celebrities.
Canada loves our horses, right?
We love horses, and it really is a particularly egregious practice. These animals are shipped for extensive periods of time. The law says they can go up to 28 hours without food, water, and rest. Unfortunately, a lot of the shipments even go beyond that. Horses have a high sense of gravity, so it's very hard for them to be on these planes and landing and taking off, because they have to refuel in Alaska before they go over the ocean. So, it's terrifying, puts these animals at risk of things like shipping fever, injuries, because often they collapse on these planes, dehydration, stress, you name it. It really is just a horrific practice, and such a shame that Canada continues to engage in this.
And, Kaitlyn, I think one of the things that people are most surprised at, even people who've been following this issue for a while, is that a lot of the horses that are being exported over to Japan are bred for this purpose. These aren't old work horses or anything. These are animals who have been specifically bred for this reason.
Yeah, it is interesting, because we are, unfortunately, also a major exporter of horse meat from Canada. So that we have a pretty big domestic slaughter industry, and many of those horses are, retired companion animals or farm horses. They're bought and sold at auctions, but these horses are, different, as you point out. There's basically two main breeders in Ontario, actually, that kind of support this industry and breed these animals specifically so that they can be exported to Japan to be killed.
So this whole industry is basically two exporters, like two different, two main organizations, businesses.
Well, there's two main breeders, and they're both in Ontario. And then the actual export companies, there's like four. It's actually really hard to find any information about it, but there's one in Manitoba and about three exporters in Alberta. And one of the companies is Bovary, and Bovary is also a major player in the domestic horse slaughter industry. So yeah, when it all boils down to it, it's about an $18 million a year, give or take, industry, and most of that money goes to 5 or 6 companies, more or less.
Wow, unbelievable. Well, you know what, Kaitlyn, I really want people to understand it a little bit better. You explained the basics so well, but we actually did an investigation recently with Animal Justice to be able to sort of document the beginning of the journey to what happens when they arrive in Japan. And so it's just 5 minutes, but I think it's an important piece for everyone to see. There's nothing gruesome. There's no slaughter footage or anything, but this is also just really important for somebody who's advocating to be able to say that they've seen this video. So, Ina, do you mind playing the video for us?
Animal Justice is releasing a new investigation into the harrowing journey horses endure as they're shipped by air from Canada to Japan for slaughter. This is the first time the same shipment has been documented, both leaving Canada and landing in Japan. And, in a bombshell discovery, it reveals that most shipments likely exceed the already remarkably cruel 28-hour time limit for transporting horses without food, water, or rest. And upon their arrival, many of the horses we followed were sprayed with harsh disinfectant chemicals. Every year, thousands of large, gentle draft horses raised in barren Canadian feedlots are packed into wooden crates and flown across the world to Japan so they can be fattened and killed to be eaten as a raw delicacy. Legally, these exports could take up to 28 agonizing hours, an excessively long time which puts horses at risk of suffering due to hunger, extreme thirst, prolonged stress, injuries, and illness. In calculating how long horses are forced to go without food, water, and rest, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency only monitors these flights until the moment the plane hits the Japanese tarmac. When asked by lawmakers about what happens after the flight's arrival in Japan, the horse export lobby hand-waved away this final stretch.
The last horse off the flight is back on feed, water, and rest within 2 hours of landing.
But our investigation reveals a starkly different reality. The first of 4 shipments we filmed took place on May 5th, 2024. CFIA records suggested this was a shorter than average shipment. Approximately 96 horses were transported by truck from a farm in rural Alberta to Edmonton International Airport. By 9 p.m., the horses were being unloaded from the trucks. Over the course of the night, these horses were prodded out of the trucks and packed into wooden crates, about 3 horses per crate. They sat here until 1 a.m. when they were lifted onto the airplane. 3 hours later, the plane took off. We tracked Korean Air flight number 9214 as it flew for nearly 3 hours to Anchorage, Alaska, followed by a 7.5-hour flight to Kitakyushu Airport in Japan. When shipments depart from Winnipeg, these flights take even longer. Official time records kept by the government fail to account for the rest of the horse's journey after planes land in Japan. This means every official Canadian Food Inspection Agency timeline ends here. Even though the horses spent nearly 24 grueling hours without food, water, or rest, the CFIA considers this timeline to be well within legal limits. Animal Justice worked with Japanese animal advocacy group Life Investigation Agency to monitor the rest of the journey. Upon arrival, the exhausted horses were slowly unloaded from the plane. Some waited for over 4 hours before being trucked to a quarantine facility 30 minutes from the airport. After their stay in quarantine, they will be sent to a feedlot, fattened, and eventually killed for meat. The official CFIA timeline says the journey took nearly 24 long hours. In reality, it appears these horses were stuck in crates without food, water, or rest for over 28 hours, unlawfully surpassing the legal limit. And this was one of the shorter shipments. Life Investigation Agency filmed the arrival of 3 more flights to Japan between 2 different airports, and each extended the official timeline by between 4.5 and 6.5 hours. All 4 of these flights appear to have gone over the 28-hour legal limit. And the last shipment we filmed appears to have taken over 31 hours. Government records obtained by the Canadian Horse Defence Coalition provide us with a summary of 15 other horse shipments to Kitakyushu and Kansai airports over the past 7 months. These documents allowed us to estimate that at least 2/3 of these shipments exceeded the legal time limit when accounting for the Japanese end of the trip. Shipments from the Winnipeg airport, where the nearest feedlot is 5 hours away, were even worse, with all 4 of the recorded flights likely exceeding 30 hours. And after their long, grueling journey, the horses we followed were greeted with more abuse. At the quarantine facility near Kansai International Airport, the trucks were regularly sprayed with disinfectant while the horses were still inside. The person filming was also hit by the mist and claimed it burned their eyes. Desperately dehydrated, some horses tried to lick the harsh chemical off of the nets of the truck. But even if all of these shipments were legal, there's just no ethical way to transport horses halfway around the world for slaughter. That's why we've been calling on the federal government to end this cruel practice. 2 bills have been introduced in Parliament that would ban the export of horses for slaughter. This practice can come to an end. Visit animaljustice.ca/horse-export to demand that officials immediately halt these shipments that go over the legal time limit, until laws are in effect to ban the practice for good.
Well, so, first of all, I have to say the part about the horses so dehydrated that they're licking the disinfectant is so heartbreaking to me. They're so desperate. And so this was the sort of first bombshell that we found out, is that they're breaking the law constantly with these exports. But then Kaitlyn, one of the big talking points from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency during committee meetings, for the live horse export bill C-355 was that barely any horses die from this practice, like one over many years. But Animal Justice also uncovered information right after this investigation that completely destroys that argument. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it was really frustrating when I appeared before the House of Commons committee, and it wasn't the first time I'd heard this, but it seems like certain parliamentarians, not all, and the industry, and even the Canadian Veterinary Medical Association, were all happy to assume that because we basically have no information about these horses after they land, and so in that context of absolutely no data, CFIA legislators were all happy to assume that that meant that there were no deaths and injuries. The CFIA repeatedly said, well, they have to report deaths and injuries that happened during the flight, and we have really good relationships in Japan. So they'd tell us if anything serious was happening. And they were grilled by some lawmakers, like my MP Ben Carr. He really pushed them on that and said, well, how do you know? I don't think you're getting that information. But they held to it that no, the horses are all in excellent shape. So then we got records from the government of Japan through the folks at LIA that helped us with the first investigation. And it showed that that's completely false. Just in a 1-year period, 22 horses died. Some of them died during transport. Some of them died hours, days later. There were like 60 plus horses injured, experiencing shipping fever, for instance, that I mentioned earlier. And some of the deaths were dehydration. So obviously that's being caused by transport. If you're shipped for 30 plus hours with no water and then 2 days later die of dehydration, it seems pretty relevant to me. So, and I've been working on this issue for a long time. And I have to say, when I first opened the chart that the folks from Japan sent, I was floored. Like, it was actually worse than even I expected. And there were pregnant horses too, horses who there are CFIA folks at the airport who inspect these horses and assure us that only horses in good health are sent. And there were horses having miscarriages shortly after they were being shipped. They should have never been put on a plane if they were pregnant. So it was really, really disturbing, to say the least. And at the same time, though, I was glad that we got that information and that we were able to bring it to light.
Yeah, devastating stuff to hear, but important for for everybody to be on the same page with. Pierre, talking right now with Kaitlyn about the handful of people that are benefiting from this industry. Can you explain why it's still been so hard to get this ban in place? Like, tell us what's going on behind the scenes. Tell us politically what's at play here.
Well, it's tempting to think this is a straightforward ethical issue. The political resistance to the bill reveals some deep-seated dynamics in Canadian politics, and one that's heavily in favor of the agricultural industry and rural voters. Let's start with the elephant in the room. The ag industry wields a lot of power in Canada. May not surprise too many people to learn just how influential this sector is, even in a country where urban voters substantially outnumber all others. Agriculture isn't just an economic engine in rural areas, it's a political force. And the live export of horses for slaughter, while it may be a niche industry, it's still profitable for a handful of ag businesses and their supply chains. These operators argue that banning this practice would set a dangerous precedent for government interference in agriculture. And they're backed by larger ag groups that don't even deal in horse exports, but fear what they call a slippery slope. This is where the ag lobby goes to work. They argue that banning the export of horses could lead to restrictions on other farming practices. Today it's horses, tomorrow it might be cows or pigs. This argument plays into the fears of rural communities that their livelihoods are at risk. It's a powerful message, and it resonates with politicians looking to keep rural voters on side. That brings me to the next major factor, the rural vote. Politicians of all stripes are quite aware of the outsized influence that rural ridings can have in elections. Rural MPs send fewer Rural areas send fewer MPs to Ottawa than urban centers, but in a tight race, those ridings can make all the difference, and they're quite loyal voters. So supporting a bill like the horse export bill risks alienating rural voters and farming communities who might see it as an attack on their way of life. Even if the issue at hand is relatively small, like exporting horses to Japan, it gets lumped in with a broader narrative of urban centers dictating how rural Canadians should live and work. Politicians tread carefully around these types of issues. The final thing is the slippery slope argument. As I said, the ag industry loves this tactic. I don't think there's a lot of basis for it, but it works. They argue that the horse export bill, while it's about horses, they use it as a wedge issue, the first step toward more government regulation on farming practices in general. They frame it as the thin edge of a wedge that could one day lead to restrictions on transportation, raising, or slaughter of animals. And while these arguments may not hold water for everyone, it's persuasive for politicians who want to avoid controversy. No one wants to be the politician who inadvertently opened the floodgates to change in agricultural laws. So these factors combine the power of the ag lobby, the political need to appease rural voters, and this specious slippery slope argument. And so it's no wonder that the horse export bill or anything we're trying to do around this to date has encountered so much resistance.
I mean, we hear the slippery slope argument in everything we try to do legislatively.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is we do hear tell from the farming community that most of them don't like this particular practice. But that's sort of keeping, they have to keep their ranks tight, right? So Kaitlyn, talking about how to break through that pressure, that pressure to appease the ag industry, the animal ag industry. Tell us how a potential horse ban first came into existence legislatively, and sort of where that, how that started.
Well, it's been a long road. There's been, from the beginning, folks like the Canadian Horse Defense Coalition and even celebrities like Jan Arden have been really vocal about this practice for some time and really working to raise awareness. Folks that have gone to the airport and documented the shipments and have been doing so for so long, here in Manitoba, Dana with Manitoba Animal Save, she's really a hero. So, we have these folks that have been on the ground pushing for so long to just tell people this is even happening. And they worked so hard that, I think eventually there was momentum, and this was an issue that, you kind of started to see in the media from time to time. And folks, by and large, I've never spoken to anyone about this issue who wasn't, first of all, shocked when they learned that it was happening, and then also appalled, because I think for many folks, horses kind of hold a special place in their heart. So, it really gained public prominence as an issue, and eventually we saw it included in the Liberal Party of Canada's platform. I should also give the NDP credit. They've introduced 3 separate bills over the years, all in an effort to ban this practice. So the NDP took it up, the Liberals eventually took it up. So, we've got 2 political parties on side. So that was great. We all celebrated when it was in that mandate letter to the minister after the election. So they promised during the election. Then in December 2021, Justin Trudeau wrote to the agriculture minister, Minister Bibeau, and gave her a mandate and said, you got to ban live horse exports. So we were all thrilled. And then around that time, I thought, well, let's just put in some ATIP requests, some access to information requests, and see what's going on. Like, what's the status? When are they going to enforce this ban? And that's when it really became clear to me that minister's office had no intention of actually banning it, and that was really alarming. Most of the documents were just, meat industry lobbyists like Pierre said, saying how, this is so silly. There's actually no animal welfare issue here. And then when I would meet with folks from Ag Canada, they would repeat that. Well, since there's no actual animal welfare basis for this, and it's just being done to appease activists, it's just very challenging, and we're not really sure how to do it. So we have to consult for a long time. So it was really, really frustrating because, we saw this momentum and it really culminated in this moment where it looked like there was going to be change, and then it just kind of fizzled.
And Kaitlyn, can I just ask, interject? At that point, were you hoping that they were just going to do it through regulations? Like they were
Yeah.
going to just change regulations as opposed to having to have a bill, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's always been our position. Like, and so for folks who aren't lawyers, there are two kinds of laws, basically. There's statutes. So, you know, the Criminal Code of Canada is a statute, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act is a statute. But then under statutes, you can pass regulations. And those are a little bit more nimble. You don't have to go through a whole legislative process. So from the beginning, we've said, like, look, this is so straightforward. Like, here's the language. You could just put one section in the regulations and you're done. And they said, no, it has to be a bill. And then the minister did not introduce a government bill. We saw Senator Dalphon introduce a Senate bill, which was great. And then eventually MP Tim Lewis, who's a Liberal MP, introduced his bill, which is 355. And that was a really exciting moment. We were concerned because private members' bills procedurally are a little bit more challenging. But nonetheless, you know, it was a huge step forward and was cause for great celebration. And yet here we find ourselves today with it stalled.
So Pierre, tell us where the bill was in the legislative process before prorogation happened. So give us the rundown. And this is great, folks. Just FYI, just being able to get a little bit more of a crash course from Kaitlyn and Pierre around how the legislative system works. This is really good.
Yeah, so this is what the challenges were and are of currently still are of banning the export of horses. I'm going to break it down into 4 parts. First, the journey of the bill through the House of Commons. Then number 2, how a Conservative senator threw a wrench in the works. Number 3, what happened when Parliament recently prorogued, and then how this affects bills like C-355. So first of all, in terms of the journey through Parliament, the bill started with a clear purpose to stop the export of live horses to Japan. It was by, as Kaitlyn said, MP Tim Lewis of Kitchener-Conestoga, in the form of a private member's bill. And that's a bill that is proposed by a member of Parliament who isn't in cabinet. The legislative process began in the House of Commons, and you've probably all heard these terms or familiar with them. There was first reading. This is where the bill was introduced and officially placed on the agenda in Parliament. There's no debate or vote at this stage. It's just a formal, here's what it is about. Number 2, there's a second reading. This is the first big hurdle. MPs debated the bill's merits and voted on whether it should move forward. In this case, the bill passed second reading with solid support. Then there's the committee stage. The bill went to the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food, where MPs studied it in detail, proposed amendments, and heard from witnesses, including Kaitlyn. And finally, third reading, bill's back in the full House of Commons. MPs debated it and voted on the final version of the bill. It passed again, clearing the way for it to head to the Senate. This is where the trouble began.
Can we just stop for a second, Pierre?
Yeah.
What was sort of the breakdown of party lines and voting?
Kaitlyn, do you want to answer that? Because you followed that more closely at the time.
Yeah, sure. So the NDP, it's actually, it was really quite straightforward. The NDP and Liberals supported it. The Bloc kind of waffled for a while, and actually individual Bloc MPs did seem supportive, but then as a party, they voted against it. Conservatives all voted against it. Again, you know, I understand that there were a few Conservative MPs who might have personally supported it and they didn't vote, but yeah, that was it. NDP, blocking Greens, all in support, blocking Conservatives against.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, so Pierre, then we got it through the House. Then what happened?
Then it goes to the Senate. This is where the bad guy comes in. So at this first reading in the Senate, like in the House, it's a formality. Then at second reading, this is where things got complicated. Conservative Senator Don Plett, who's also the leader of the opposition in the Senate, played a key role in slowing down the bill's progress. He was using procedural tools available in the Senate to delay its movement through second reading. The Senate operates with a lot of freedom when it comes to debating bills, more than the House of Commons. There's no strict timeline for how long a debate can last, and senators can use this flexibility to stall bills they oppose. Senator Plett took advantage of this, stretching out debates and raising concerns and refusing himself to address the bill, and raising issues, most of which are echoed arguments from Big Ag. One of the key strategies was the slippery slope argument in the Senate chamber, that the banning of horses for slaughter could set a precedent for restricting other agricultural practices. And it was an effective way to plant doubt and buy time. Even the specter in the slippery slope argument, even the specter of somehow this could lead to a ban of the lobster fishery in Atlantic Canada was used. And that
and just to throw a little perspective in with Senator Plett, he has basically been our main opposition for pretty well every animal bill we put through. Right, Kaitlyn?
Yeah.
I think he's shown up at pretty well to try to block everyone.
Yeah, he's got
actively.
He's got some predictable tools that he uses. One is this delay, like, oh, well, you can't possibly vote on it until I've spoken. Okay, can you speak? Well, no, I still got to prepare. You know, it's only been 8 months. I've still got to take my time and do my due diligence before I give my 10-minute speech. So that, and then also like he's insisted on field trips. This is something that he did with Bill S-15, which was aimed at banning great ape and elephant captivity. It was like, well, we couldn't possibly vote until all of the Senate committee goes on a field trip to African lion safari. And he did that here too. Well, we all go on a field trip to see these feedlots, even though that's not going to tell you anything about the horse's journey to Japan. So, you know, predictable as it was still really frustrating and sadly fairly effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's right.
Okay,
it was effective.
So Pierre,
it was effective. Senator Plett is works pretty hard at opposing important pieces of animal protection legislation. In fact, he used if it weren't so sad, it would be funny argument around the live lobster that because like horses, live lobsters are flown by air export to China. And on the flights, you know, that he was drawing analogies there to the horses. So and that sucked up a fair bit of airtime in the full chamber of the Senate. So then part 3, what happens when Parliament is prorogued, which is where we find ourselves now. And just a quick 101 on prorogation. It's when the Prime Minister asks the Governor General to formally end a session of Parliament. So Parliament doesn't end itself. Parliament runs from one election to the other, but Parliament has a number of sessions. And during the ending of the session, all legislative activity, debates, committee work, and unfinished bills come to a halt. For most bills, prorogation is the end of the line. They die on the order paper, meaning they're effectively wiped off the agenda. If the government or an MP wants to continue the bill, they have to start over from scratch. And prorogation is often used by governments to reset their agenda or get out of political jam, which is what we saw the Prime Minister do this time around. For instance, the government might prorogue Parliament to introduce a fresh speech from the throne, which always comes after prorogation. So the private member's bill from MP Tim Lewis with prorogation, most bills die. Private members' bills are treated differently, at least in the House of Commons. Thanks to changes in the rules about 20 years ago, private members' bills in the House automatically resume at the same stage when Parliament reconvenes. And this is designed as a safeguard to ensure that the relatively limited opportunities that private members have, as opposed to the government, give private members' bills a bit of a second chance. So
the C-355 is a private member's bill.
That's right.
So there is a little bit of hope there, except
it's moved into the Senate. So it's easy to get it through the House again. It's basically through the House. It's in the Senate. The Senate doesn't have the same rules around private members' bills. So it's a good news, bad news story. In the Senate, all bills, including private members, are wiped clean by prorogation. This means that C-355 would have to be reintroduced in the Senate during the new session. Fortunately, it only got to, well, not fortunately it got, but fortunately it was only at second reading. It hasn't gone through the lengthy committee process. And so really all we've lost is first reading in the Senate. It would quickly get back to second reading. Let's say if a snap election doesn't happen quickly after prorogation.
Now, the likelihood of a snap election happening is quite high. There's some talk that that may not be the case, but we at Animal Justice have realized we can't count on that. So let's talk about, Kaitlyn, how we're pivoting.
Yeah, so to be clear, like we're, as you said, we're not giving up on Bill C-355. We are going to do our very best if there is a window of time to make sure that it does pass. But as I did also say, since the beginning, we've been saying you don't need a bill to do this. You can just amend the regulation. Now, time is tight. This would have been something to do 3 years ago. But here we are. So what we're saying now is, okay, you know what? There's a new agriculture minister. I understand that there might be more openness to moving on this issue. We'll see how much openness.
And this is Minister Lawrence MacAulay.
Yep. So we want to give Minister MacAulay the benefit of the doubt. And we're trying to give him an opportunity here, to save the day at the last minute. The bill is on life support, I think we can say, or in the ICU, depending on how you want to look at it. So, while as I said, we're not giving up on it, I think the more promising route is to go back to pushing for regulations. It's really uncertain because if the government falls in late March, well, of course, that's not enough time to actually pass regulations. Introducing them would still be something and would still be something that we can work with. So publishing some draft regulations and at least starting the process. So that's what we're saying is, at the very least, just start the regulatory process. And that way the door is not completely shut on passing the ban as promised. It's been more than 3 years since the Minister of Agriculture was mandated to ban this practice, so I think it's high time. And as I said, it's a new minister, and I really hope that he sees this opportunity not only for horses, but also politically for, I think it's a really good news story, like 80% of Canadians almost, and that's across political lines, support banning this practice. So making good on the promise, I think, would be a good news story for the Liberals, good news story for the NDP, and of course, it would be the right thing to do for animals.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been saying, Minister MacAulay could be a hero for the horses. Pierre, the government didn't do the ban through the regulatory route the first time around, in the first place, with the different ag minister. So what are some other reasons, Kaitlyn gave a couple, but what are some other reasons they might consider doing regulations now? What's your pitch? What are you pitching to the Liberals? And if you had the minister in front of you, how would you convince him?
Well, my pitch would certainly include the fact that the Liberals are on thin ice right now politically, and that the last thing they want to do is upset some of the few people who are left in their voter base, including folks who care about animal protection. So what happened was, when the Liberals were re-elected in 21, as was indicated, Prime Minister Trudeau included the commitment in Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bibeau's mandate letter of December 2021. That letter explicitly directed her to implement a ban on air export of horses, but she wasn't on board with this promise personally. It seems sources suggest she just didn't think it was appropriate, and instead of advancing the issue, she stalled it. Her reluctance cost us precious time, and for horse welfare advocates, it's been frustrating to see a clear promise and a clear direction from the Prime Minister bogged down by internal resistance. So then the question becomes the slower legislation process or regulation. As Kaitlyn indicated from the start, Animal Justice has maintained that legislation isn't actually necessary to fulfill this promise, because a ban on the export of horses for slaughter can be enacted via regulation under the existing law, Health of Animals Act. It gives the minister the authority to make regulations that govern the transport and treatment of animals. And so it means the government already has the tools available. And prorogation, which halts the legislative progress, doesn't impact the minister's or cabinet's ability to make any and all regulations. It's a separate process. It's immune from the reset button that prorogation presses on Parliament. That's why we've been urging Minister MacAulay to act swiftly to use the regulatory path. And let's not forget why this issue matters in the first place. It reflects the will of Canadians. Polls show that over 80% of Canadians support banning the live export of horses. And for the Liberals, this widespread public support should make the issue easier. Failing to to deliver on a clear and popular promise is what I would tell the minister could be a political misstep, especially heading into the election.
Yeah,
and that's the
absolutely.
crux. Time is running out. The next election is looming. The Liberals are on shaky ground. Animal welfare issues matter to their base, including particularly young voters and those in urban centers. And we would characterize this as breaking a promise that would betray the core constituents of the Liberals, a core constituency they can't afford to alienate. And so the calculus for them should be simple. They need every advantage they can going into the next election.
It seems like it's just a no-brainer, right? The way Pierre says it, it's like, well, of course. One of the problems is Minister McCauley is a farmer himself. So you can understand that this is a tough pitch, but that is why we are putting all of our resources towards getting our animal justice supporters to reach out to Minister McCauley. But now we need the AJ super soldiers to go deeper. All right. So Kaitlyn, let's talk a little bit about the plan here. So we need phone calls, right? We need phone calls, and we need some reach outs to MPs. And you think, that personal touch will really benefit this push.
Yeah, I think, the way that we're looking at it is we need to amp up the pressure on Minister McCauley in a serious way and in a fast way. But, as you said, we're trying to frame it in a bit of a positive light instead of, criticizing him. He's a new minister in his defense, but, we're trying to frame it as like, here's your golden opportunity. We don't know what's going to happen after the next election, but like, this is popular. 80% of Canadians want it. This is your chance to be a hero for horses, and it'll be part of your legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. So folks, this is, I'm going to go through our action plan, and Ina Maria is going to put it in our chat. We have an AJ action brief that is absolutely well set out with all of the instructions, with the phone numbers, with the place you can look up for your MPs in info. It's also got talking points, but I want to just sort of take you through it a little bit step by step quickly. So first of all, and Kaitlyn and Pierre, just pitch in on anything that I miss or that could use a little extra explanation. So our number one action that we're asking AJers to do is to phone the Ag Minister, Lawrence McCauley. So we have a phone number for you. It is his Ottawa office. It is his Ottawa office. And when you phone, you are likely to reach, a staff member in his office, or even more so likely to get the voicemail. And regardless of what happens, you are going to leave a message that basically is urging Minister McCauley to have compassion for the horses, be a hero for the horses, whatever you want to say, and urgently amend the health of animals regulations to ban the export of live horses overseas for slaughter. Okay, so that's the basic message that you're putting out there. You can add your own little pieces. You can go deeper and explain more if you'd like to, but really that is all you need to say. And you could, if you get somebody on the line live, you could say, do you see him ending the export of live horses overseas through the regulations? As Pierre mentioned, one of the big things we want to sort of hit home with whomever we talk to is that this is a Liberal Party election promise. How can people believe the Liberals' election promises in the upcoming election if this promise is broken? And again, we have many more talking points. If you're somebody who likes to go in and be able to talk for a while, then that's great. We have you covered. If you're somebody who just wants to say, hello, I just want to make it known that I would like Minister McCauley to do this. Okay. The second rung, like if you are like this has to happen. You've been working on this, following this for a long time, then we need you to go to the second action as well. Oh, sorry, before I leave the first action, one thing is we'd like to have sort of sustained phone calls over the next week, not just all today. And so what we propose is that if you are, we've got it broken down into sort of the letters of your first name. If, for example, if the letters of your first name start with A to E, then you phone today. If they're F to J, phone tomorrow. If they're H to K, the weekend. Now, this is just an idea to be able to spread out the phone calls so that it looks like there's a good sustained sort of interest in this. However, if you're somebody who, and what I would recommend is that you take the day that you are going to make the call, put it in your calendar, put an alarm on it, so that alert on it, so that you will remember to do it. And if that is not the kind of person you are and you're like, I will never remember it, make the call today. Okay, it's okay. Doesn't matter what your first name is, make the call today if that is the case for you. All right, so we're good so far. We're good on the first action. Second action is to call, and this is the advanced, you are a champion stage, or meet with your MP. Even if they're conservative folks, no matter what party it is, we need to put pressure on Minister McCauley. There needs to be chat about this. This needs to be circulating, and we do that by reaching out to our MPs in our constituency. And so what will happen for that is very similar. You will phone your MP's constituency office, okay? So don't call their Ottawa office, call their constituency office, because you are a constituent. Again, if you don't know who your MP is, we have a link in the action brief where you can look that up super easily and within 30 seconds. Again, you'll likely get a team member answering the phone or voicemail, and you're going to say something very similar to what you're going to say to Minister McCauley. I'm your constituent. I want you to know that banning this brutal export of live horses overseas is very important to me. You know, in light of prorogation and the bills being halted, would you support an amendment to the health of animals regulations in order to ban live horse exports overseas? So that is basically what you're saying. And if you get somebody in person, you could say, if they are interested in advocating, then they should reach out to Minister McCauley or do whatever they can to support this going forward. And folks, if your MP is Liberal, basically you've got to hit home that election promise. Okay, you've got to hit home the election promise. And again, there are talking points if you want to add more, but that is basically all you need to do. Pierre, Kaitlyn, did I kind of cover it?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say too, what the NDP is, they have really been the champions of this issue for so long. So, when I'm speaking with NDP MPs, I do remind them of that. Doing this is not just you helping out the Liberals to look good and make good on a campaign commitment, that this is actually an issue that the NDP's championed. As I said, they've introduced 3 different private members' bills over the years. It was MP Alistair McGregor that sponsored the most recent parliamentary e-petition by Jan Arden that saw, more than 36,000 Canadians support the ban. So, it's really a political win, I think, for both parties. And the interesting thing too, like we mentioned the public support, and someone was asking about the polls, so I put those in the chat. One of the polls actually shows when you break it down by political lines, supporters of the Conservatives are actually more likely to support a ban than any other political party. So, it's worth, I think, mentioning that when you speak to Conservatives, because often we think about these things, well, conservative voters would not support this because they support ag. That's not the case. That's a generalization. It turns out that they do support this, and it's important for Conservative MPs to know that.
Excellent. Kaitlyn, can you drop that survey link once again into the chat, just on a new thread, so people can see that? The other thing that I wanted to mention is, if you haven't grabbed the action brief URL already, all you have to do is press the link in the chat. We also have this action now front and center in our AJA group and on our page. Okay, so again, it'll give you an overview of all of this. On our AJA page, you can also share it. It's a shareable link. So feel free to share it with any other people that you know are interested in this issue or love horses. Just who loves horses? There's so many. So folks, Jenny is asking question. I don't see specific wording suggested for the regulation. Is it just one sentence that's needed in the Health of Animals Act, Kaitlyn?
Yeah, it's a bit more than a sentence, but I would say just one section, which would say, and I have the draft language, but I don't have it in front of me, and I'm not, wedded to that draft, but basically all you need is a section that says, no individual, no person shall export a horse from Canada if they know or reasonably ought to know that the purpose is for slaughter or for fattening for slaughter, more or less. So just like a very, very short and clear section that says you can't export horses for slaughter if that's the purpose. We don't really need anything beyond that, I don't think. We don't need paperwork. We don't need any sort of tracking, because it's not like folks are going off in the dead of night and shipping one horse, overseas. We're talking about like 80 horses showing up at the airport. 99 actually is the most common number showing up at the airport all at once. That would raise some alarms. So I'm not too concerned about, getting permits or tracking or figuring out what the purpose is. I think all we need is just a really, really clear prohibition.
Excellent. Thank you. And Jeanette is asking, can we send an email if we're in the US? So one thing I'm just going to say is if you aren't in Canada, there is a link for you to be able to send an email to Minister Macaulay. And just put that into the chat again. This is an auto email, but you can change the subject line and change the body of the email to create more impact. It helps them to get past the filters. So if you're not in a position where you're able to call Minister Macaulay and you're not able to reach out to your MP, or you aren't in Canada, that is the way to go, is to send an email changing the subject line and the body of the email, as we know is the way we do it here in AGA. Okay, a couple of more questions, Kaitlyn and Pierre, before we wrap up. Before I ask these questions, I just really would like to know, and I think, this issue, this work has been really front and center for Pierre and Kaitlyn, especially Kaitlyn has been on this file for so long. Can we just put in the chat, folks, how many of you are going to take action number one or action number 1 and 2? Can you just tell us in the chat, let us know, we can declare it now, who here is going to make some phone calls, yeah, just for sure, we got 1 and 2. I will take both actions. I love it. Both definitely, both to 1 and 2. We got a lot of 1 and 2s. Those are my AJers. I love it. Both excellent. 1 and 2. It's okay if you only do 1. I'm happy with, but yeah, I love it. I love it. We'll send an email both. Okay, excellent. Yes. Thank you very much, folks. We love to see this. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. This makes my day. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so just a couple of questions. Rosalind is asking, if the ban were to be put in place, what would happen to the horses currently on the horse for slaughter feedlots? This is a question that I haven't actually heard before. Kaitlyn, any ideas?
Yeah, this one comes up a lot. Often folks who are opposed will say, well, we can't ban it because, you're going to have all these unwanted horses. So yeah, it is complicated. So the thing to keep in mind is that these are purpose-bred horses. And so it's not, it's not as if there will continue to be horses over time with nowhere to go. But realistically, like, let's say it was banned tomorrow, there are some horses that we need to think about. I'm not, I can't guarantee that none would end up in the domestic slaughter industry, to be clear. I hope that doesn't happen. But what I would say is that the Canadian Horse Defense Coalition, Jan Arden, horse rescue groups across the country are already thinking about this and planning for this. And I think even fundraising to make sure that, if there are horses, that there are places for them to go. And one of the things that Seneca always says from the Canadian Horse Defense Coalition is, draft horses are wanted, actually. They're wanted for many purposes. We're not talking about, animals that no one in society desires. It can actually be difficult, as I understand it, to find draft horses sometimes for folks who want them for companionship or other purposes. So I hope that these horses will still find homes. There are, as I understand it, homes for them. And there is, basically a food bank, more or less, that folks are already kind of planning for to make sure that, horses can be cared for if necessary. So we won't see some sort of, mass situation where these horses are all abandoned or neglected. No one would let that happen in the advocacy community. And folks that want this ban and have been working on it for years have been planning for that as well.
Amazing. Thank you. And it just, speaks to the power of the groups and all the people that have been working on this issue. The horseshit.ca campaign has been so popular, thanks to Jan. The coalition for, sorry, I don't want to get it wrong, Kaitlyn.
Canadian Horse Defense Coalition.
Thank you.
I would just say CHDC, but I know not everyone CHDC.
That's right. Has been doing so much work on this. Okay, Pierre, maybe you can answer this question from Peter. He's asking, if regulations were changed before an election is called and the Conservatives win, couldn't they just change them back?
Absolutely. But that certainly wouldn't be one of their priorities. They're pretty keen on axing the tax, and I think they're going to be pretty busy with all the Trudeau government things they plan to unravel, and we're hoping and expecting that wouldn't be a priority for them.
Okay. Winifred is asking, the Bloc Québécois is in her riding, any tips for messaging Bloc Québécois, and actually we should address messaging Conservatives. Because sometimes we say don't bother with the Conservatives because it's just a waste of time. But we've decided it's worth our time to reach out to the Conservatives on this. So can you explain, and either of you?
Yeah, the one thing I would say about messaging to those two parties, and the Bloc in particular, and this is something that we've said to them, is you can kind of give them an out, right? Like you voted against this bill, your party, but you did that based on misinformation, right? And it's not your fault. The CFIA told you these shipments were all meeting the 28-hour legal limit. They told you these horses were all arriving in great shape, no problems here. It's just these activists who are making stuff up. But now we have concrete evidence that disproves those claims. And so I think that for me, is the messaging that I've been using when speaking with Conservatives and Bloc MPs in particular, is to say, okay, I get that you didn't support it before, but surely now that you know that information was false, you might reconsider your position.
Yeah, that's great. That's excellent. Thank you so much.
That and the fact that the polling shows that, as Kaitlyn said, that issue is even more popular. The idea of banning horse exports for slaughter is even more popular with people who identify as Conservative voters, and that's something politicians always care about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last thing. I know we've gone late. Sorry, folks, but I've found this really helpful. Pierre, as somebody who speaks to politicians all the time, any words of advice or encouragement to help those who are considering meeting with their MP, or even people that are just like maybe a little bit nervous about picking up the phone and calling?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whether it's going to be via phone or in person, the MP or maybe a staff member, the key thing I keep in mind when I go in and lobby with some folks who aren't professional lobbyists is make it personal. You don't need to be an expert in animal welfare or veterinary science to make your case. Your biggest asset is your personal experience and your passion for the issue. Share this, the fact that this matters with you. Are you a horse lover? Have you witnessed the suffering of these animals or animals? MPs, always with a mind on winning the next election, respond to real stories and real people.
That is a great reminder, Pierre. That is a great reminder. And that, I mean, your MPs especially they're working for you, your constituent, right? So even if you have messaged them numerous times and they've never gotten back to you, they're still reading it. Their staffers are still reading it, folks. And every email, every phone call is an indication of, they think of many, many people caring about this issue. Okay. So do not give up hope around this. All right. Well, folks, I think we need to let Pierre and Kaitlyn get back to work on this. Can we come back to just get off of Spotlight, Ina, and come back to our gallery view? And AJers, can we please give Kaitlyn and Pierre, for his first time, his first AJ event, a big AJ? Thank you. Woohoo! Thank you so much, you two, for working so hard on this. And folks, I look forward to hearing about how your actions go. Please keep us posted. You can drop us an email at academy@animaljustice.ca if you get anywhere with any of this. And don't forget, we will be having another AJA Lunchtime Live in about 2 weeks. Keep yourself posted on that. If you're on an AJA list, then you will get notice as soon as we announce it. All right, everybody, have a wonderful rest of your week. Happy 2025. Let's make this one of the most powerful we can for the animals. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.